Finger here. Subscribe so you never miss an upload.
Welcome to Dungeon Craft, the home of independent and homebrew RPGs. I'm Professor DM, and today we're counting down my top 10 list of fantasy games that are not D&D. I already did a top 10 of games that are like D&D a couple months back. These are games that feature totally different mechanics, or mostly different mechanics. You're not going to see strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, armor class, hit points. If that's in the game, it's not going to be on this list. And I want to stress, it's not a quality competition. All of these games are great and maybe the #1 game for you and your group. I made the list based on how groundbreaking these games were to me. Like, these games made me sit up, take notice, and like, wow, and rethink how I approached role-playing games. And these are elevator pitches. I'm trying to keep each game to 45 seconds. So if I get some of the details or the mechanics wrong, you'll let me know in the comments, right? I know you will. Let's get to it. 10. Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds is a generic system that allows you to create any kind of character, from a swashbuckling rogue to a charismatic reporter. You can play any number of genres: traditional fantasy, sci-fi, Wild West, horror, any genre you can think of. Characters have 5 attributes: agility, smarts, spirit, strength, and vigor. Instead of hard numbers, attributes are ranked by dice: D4, D6, D8, D10, D12. The higher your skill, the higher the die, and you succeed at a task by meeting or beating the target number. You also have skills and edges, which are like feats that you can use to build the character you want. There are no hit points. Instead, a successful hit inflicts a condition: shaken, wounded, or incapacitated. The result is a game that is simple, fast, and cinematic, with more crunch than most rules-like games, and the art is outstanding. 9. Simbarum by Free League. Simbarum is set in a dark fantasy forest world, straight out of the Brothers Grimm or Ridley Scott's Legend. There are 8 attributes, and you roll equal to or under the appropriate attribute on a d20 to succeed. Very simple and flexible, Simbarum is rules light, but with enough crunch to make things interesting. Characters are based on archetypes: witch hunter, ranger, duelist, sellsword, mystic. Races include barbarians, goblins, ogres, and changelings, which are shapeshifters. And the art is eye-popping. Like everything Free League does, the binding and the layout are top-notch. 8. Blades in the Dark by John Harper, published by Evil Hat. In Blades, players portray a crew of thieves in a Victorian steampunk city called Duskbowl, not unlike the world of the Thief video game series. Classes include Cutter, Hound, Leech, Slide, Spider, and Whisperer. They're all different types of thieves, and each comes with its own list of special abilities you can choose from, so no 2 characters are the same. There are dramatic elements, like you can choose a close friend and one rival, and a vice like gambling, luxury, or addiction. Crews have types like assassins, smugglers, and spies, so the players decide together what type of crew they want to be. Adventure scenarios are called scores. The main mechanic requires the players to roll a number of 6-sided dice. A 6 is a success, a 4 to 5 is a success with consequences, which the players and GM can negotiate, and a 1 to 3 is a failure. And you can push yourself to add to the dice pool, and there's this cool flashback mechanic where the players can take control in the narrative. Let's say they're trying to break into a warehouse and there's a guard. They can use the flashback mechanic to say, well, we actually offered that guard a free beer earlier in the evening, so they're no longer on duty. If you want a mature game full of skullduggery, Blades in the Dark hits that mark, and the binding and presentation is top shelf. 7. Fate of the Norns, Ragnarok by Andrew Valkauskas. Do you want to play a Viking RPG? Did you like the Northmen better than the D&D movie? Then you're going to love Fate of the Norns. Everything about this book screams authentic Viking, from the art to the names to the world to the mechanics. There are no dice used because Vikings didn't use dice. There's an action economy system where you use runes, tokens, to resolve conflicts. There are a dozen archetypes based on Viking culture. Instead of wizards, you have the Galder. Instead of the bard, you play a skald. My favorites are the Maidens of Ratatosk, which include subclasses like Death Dancer, Scorn Dominatrix, and Aggravatrix. How badass is that? If you want to play a Viking in a world that oozes authentic Viking, Ragnarok Fate of the Norns is your game. 6. The Witcher RPG by Cody and Lisa Pondsmith, are Talsorian games. Based on the book series by Andrzej Sapkowski, The Witcher is grimdark fantasy and ultra-violence by the studio that brought you Cyberpunk. Essentially, The Witcher is a reskin of that system with spells. It is fast and brutal, and players used to D&D will have a steep learning curve because this system is punishing and unforgiving. It's very simple. It's skill-based. You roll a d10, add your skill level, meet or beat the target number. It also has the best character creation system I've ever seen. Everything from your social class, birth, family, lovers, friends, enemies has a chart, and you can roll up hundreds of characters and always come up with something new and different, and the art is eye-popping. 5. Mazes by Chris O'Neill, 9th Level Games. Mazes is a sword and sorcery low fantasy RPG that seeks to capture the vibe of Robert Howard's Conan series and Farther in the Grey Mauser Tales by Fritz Leiber. Players choose between 4 roles: Paragon, Vanguard, Fighter, and Sentinel, and 21 classes, including Assassin, Thief, Barbarian, and 7 different spellcasters. Like Savage Worlds, characters have edges, allowing you to build the character you want. Each different role uses a different die, D4, D6, D8, and D10, and you only ever have to roll that die, so the player always knows what to roll. It also uses hearts instead of hit points like Index Card RPG, and it has flashbacks like Blades in the Dark. The stitch binding and 2 bookmark ribbons make this game a class act. I include a full review with the link below. 9. RuneQuest / Pendragon / Stormbringer / Basic Fantasy. All of these games are published by Chaosium and use the same mechanic. Instead of pigeonholing characters into classes, it's a skill-based system, and players assign points to the skills they want. To succeed, you need to roll your skill or under on percentile dice. There's no rolling for initiative. Characters go in the order of their dexterity, which makes sense, and it's a lot faster. Armor absorbs damage instead of making you harder to hit like in D&D, making the game seem more realistic. Characters spend magic points to cast spells. It's super easy to understand. The characters are highly customizable. What I like best is everything's on the character sheet. You clearly know this is my percentage chance of doing this thing. And you can set your game in the colorful worlds of Glorantha, Michael Moorcock's Elric, or the Europe of Arthurian legend. 3. Easy D6 by DM Scotty, Runehammer Games. EZD6 is a minimalist masterpiece. To create your character, you choose a class, and each gives you a special ability. Then you choose 2 or more special abilities / feats from a list of about 30. So you can make a stealthy barbarian or a thief who's an expert with a sword, like the Grey Mauser. It takes about 60 seconds to make a character. Instead of hit points, you count strikes. 3 strikes and you're out, and armor gives you an armor save that can cancel out a strike. The core mechanic is you roll 1d6 if you're unskilled, 2d6 if you're skilled, 3d6 if you have an advantage, and if any of those dice come up 5 to 6, you succeed at that task. Dice explode on a 6, allowing you to inflict extra strikes, and I played a lot of d6 games, and others get more attention, but in my opinion, for ease of use, speed, and excitement, EZD6 is best in class. And the EZD6 Book of Quests contains 18 outstanding adventures, so there's plenty of support for this game. Links below. 2. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Various authors, Cubicle 7. When I first played Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay back in 1988, it blew my mind. Instead of 7 classes, it had dozens of careers. When you complete one career, you move to another, purchasing ability score bumps and skills. Like RuneQuest, Warhammer is a percentile-based roll-under armor absorption system. But Warhammer had an additional bonus: specific hit locations and gory critical hit charts. You could shatter your opponent's collarbone, or sever their carotid artery, or lop off their head. Rollmaster did this first, but Warhammer improved it by reducing the descriptions and keeping the goriest ones. The setting is the Empire, essentially Renaissance Germany with elves and dwarves, but it's a lot darker and more subversive than the Warhammer Fantasy Battle game that inspired it. Warhammer has also inspired clones like Warlock, which is Warhammer converted to a D20 system, and Zweihander, which is Warhammer without the Games Workshop trademarks and a much cleaner, more accessible character sheet. I still prefer the first edition if you can get it, but Cubicle 7's update is lush and beautiful and smooths out some mechanical bumps, and the director's cut of the classic Enemy Within campaign is fantastic, one of the best ever printed. Highly recommended. Runners up: Shadow of the Demon Lord by Schwab Entertainment. Robert Schwab worked on the 5th edition, and a lot of the optional rules in your DMG ended up in this game. It's a lot like Warhammer in tone, but even darker, because the apocalypse is actually happening. Castle Falkenstein by Maximum Mike Pondsmith, Artalsorian Games. This is steampunk fantasy with cards instead of dice because those Victorians didn't use dice, they used cards. It's not grimdark at all, you got dirigibles and stuff. It's got a very Jules Verne vibe, and it's very unique. And number 1. Tracy and Curtis Hickman's XDM Extreme Dungeon Mastery. This is the game that changed the way I think about role-playing games and paved the way for this channel. Yes, it's designed by Tracy Hickman, author of Ravenloft and Dragonlance, and it's got the name Dungeon Mastery in the title, and it uses a 20-sided die. But it can't be called a retro clone or OSR. There are only 4 stats, including hit points, and the character sheet looks like this. When the player wants to do something, the GM assigns a target number, and the player rolls the d20, adds the appropriate stat, and tries to meet or beat the target number. If they succeed, they roll another d20 to determine the level of success. That's it. Those are all the rules. Initiative, the XDM decides who goes first. The XDM decides when you level up. When your character levels up, the XDM simply lowers the target number. But unless the XDM authorizes it, your hit points never increase. They stay at about 20, enough to survive low-level encounters, but not so many that the character ever becomes an unstoppable tank. There are no rules to look up, no apps needed, and nothing to argue about. Whenever I recommend this game, I get hit with 2 comments. The first is, this might work for a one-shot, but not for an extended campaign. To which I reply, my campaign's been going for about 30 years, and this is pretty much how I run games. Number 2, players really need to trust the GM to make this work. To which I say, why are you playing games with people you don't trust? Would you trust your GM to walk your dog or borrow your car, but not enough to make up a target number for a dragon that doesn't exist? Reading XDM is like seeing the Matrix for the first time. Look, no matter how crunchy the system and all the modifiers, it still comes down to a single die roll to determine whether you succeed or fail. A competent GM can just guesstimate that. A target number of 10 on a d20 gives you a 55% chance of success. A 15 plus is a 30% chance of success. This is a game about elves. We're not doing air disaster reconstructions here. Just tell me what I need to roll on a d20 and move on with the game. You can use XDM to run any genre. I ran an espionage scenario called Spy Hard recently. It features high-stakes gambling, gun battles, car chases, and I did it all with XDM. So if you don't believe it works, you can join my Patreon and see for yourself. XDM, the Extreme 2nd Edition, is available at the link below, and I still prefer the 1st edition because of the irreverent humor, but the 2nd edition gives more concrete guidelines on how to run this sort of game. Highly recommended. Until the next time, may all your rolls be 20s. Hi, Deathbringer. Why so glum?
You left off my favorite RPG.
Yeah, what's that?
Good Society, the Jane Austen role-playing game.
Well, I restricted a list of fantasy games. That one's about romance and finding a true love that lasts forever.
That's the biggest fantasy of all.
Oh my god.
For more fantasy, get my game Deathbringer and a t-shirt at the link below, and watch more Dungeon Craft.